Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl is the newest in a long line of entries to the body-swapping, time-looping, age-altering, duplicate-producing, mystery-scooping, phenomenon-inducing, shenanigan-promoting, and inconvenient seduction subgenre of anime. However, what makes this entry in particular special among the aforementioned classics is that it has class. And when I say class, what I mean is ass. Thick babes everywhere and an MC-kun with cheekiness turned up to 11 and kicked up out of the stratosphere. With all jokes aside, although you could be forgiven for assuming it's going to deliver a new appreciation of the thick and juicy, which it does, as well as some lighthearted humor as a much-needed respite from the last heartbreaking anime you watched, what it's actually going to deliver is not TNA, but a case of the feels instead. Now, while Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl, or Seishun Butiyaro, or as normal human beings like to call it, Bunny Girl Senpai, does use some time-proven tropes, science glasses kudere, the hardworking Imoto, and etc., it doesn't feature the entirely typical punch-drunk incarnations of Soon characters or quite the same level of juvenile melodrama most supernatural shenanigan-inspired harems engage in. I've seen our MC here compared to the typical angsty sort of pseudo-power fantasies that folks like Hachiman are accused of being, and I honestly just disagree completely. He's snarky and unattached in many ways, sure, but he isn't framed as being successful for his being a teenage know-it-all, which he certainly doesn't come off as. He just is snarky. Sakuta's phenomenon and snark or time loop induced strategic advantages actually yield humorous and endearing results often when engaging with Mai. There is good reason for him to have gotten to know her fairly well by these points, hence he actually navigates the conversations capably. Characters' problems are often completely unrelated to their personal anime archetype, so to speak, and this paired with a presentation and atmosphere that is relaxed but often somber makes for a string of certainly anime but nonetheless atypical arcs which don't pander to the wholly predictable science girl has trouble communicating because of being a science girl sort of scenarios. She's actually head over heels for this genius. They're clearly intentionally a bit tropey on the surface, and the high school drama is perhaps perfectly played out for some folks, I understand, but I think the drama is handled quite well. They're actually fairly complete packages as characters, and the development received in each of their arcs reflects this. But enough with the fluffy introduction. Let's get on to our characters in particular and their corresponding arcs. I don't live for all of humanity to like me. If you'd like, I'll feed you. If some poop on his face was enough for her to lose admiration, then it was just that superficial. I want them to sandwich me. I'm sure I'll say this enough, but Sakuta just is snarky and says whatever the hell is on his mind, regardless of what it is, generally speaking. He can read the atmosphere, but apparently just chooses not to, and goes intentionally against the grain, doing what he wants, satisfied with a short list of dependable friends at the beginning, just so happening to never lose the innate necessity to tell his girl what he wants. To compare this directly to the narcissistic armchair philosopher god king of angst and teenage conspiracy theories is to me to completely misunderstand what it is that you're watching. But that is honestly coming from someone who isn't quite so jaded to Origairu, even knowing full well what it is. Then I am a few seasons behind and on hold because I just used to like to start way too many shows at once, and now I look at my on hold and my to watch list and I'm just like, I don't know what to watch. How does anyone know what to watch? There are so many of them, so I just click something or decide to watch some shows that are more relevant right now because I need to make a semi-current video, and so here we are. That's about how transparent Sakuta tends to make himself, except to Kaede, because he must protect phenomenon at all costs. But most of Sakuta's further characterization comes relative to Mai in particular, so on we move. It's a woman, isn't it? Tell me that again in a month. I don't want to hear sound logic. Mai is perfect, obviously. Though not as thick as the cast of SSSS Gridman, of course, Mai could sometimes be described as fierce, perhaps a bit sadistic, perhaps even brutal at times. In the best way, of course. She is a sadistic tsundere to a degree, but her Tsun is basically only ever physical when in the vein of some level of sadism or jest, and the jest and the wit and the humor are almost always present otherwise. I'll talk about that a bit more when discussing the relationship itself, but I do really appreciate that she is human in her representation of a feisty previous child celebrity and general showbiz prodigy who, although sometimes petty and easily jealous, is also the type of person who, given an unusually suspicious situation with MC-kun, ultimately just wants an explanation after she cools down. Given her celeb status, Mai would be a total Mary Sue if not for how hard-pressed the show is to make sure you know all about her work ethic and about just how fucking extra she is. Mai's arc is fairly simple, being the first to introduce the concept of puberty syndrome, the phenomenon by which characters who are psychologically fragmented or disintegrated in some way end up having weird but apt spells befall them. It's simple but warm and heartfelt. She's a previous child star who ended up leaving her work behind for reasons which I see no real need to spoil here, though I will spoil plenty. She is disintegrated in having left behind her obvious passion, and as she avoids the limelight, the general population begins to stop taking notice of her. As less and less observe her existence, she is no longer confirmed, basically. There are obvious early thematic parallels between Sakuta's ignoring the atmosphere and Mai's condition, her puberty syndrome, as well as his own having given up without a fight, and what he intuited to be the same about Mai's relationship to her previous work, intuitions which do turn out to be true. And it all caps off with the minute following me having never been quite so happy to experience secondhand embarrassment through a fictional character. Sakuta learns responsibility, the personal responsibility to be the single person who pushes back against the atmosphere and status quo that everyone else has slowly accepted. And yes, although Mai wears a bunny uniform to attract the attention of those who can still see her early on, this show has literally nothing else to do with bunny girls. Forgiven. Before moving on to another arc, I would like to discuss Mai and Sakuta's relationship for a moment, and I see no better example to start with than this not-so-low-key masturbation joke over the phone. It's weirdly tender having a fairly cozy scene that goes into this sort of weird, awkward date conversation without going totally over the top about it. It just feels like a nice, modern representation of actual conversation between this rascal and his celeb girlfriend. Dirtiness and melodrama included were naturally expected, but not over-accentuated, taking place in a warm but mellow atmosphere in a show where it's just sort of no big deal that this weirdness happens occasionally. Part of me hates to use this word for fear of the prudish, but these jokes actually felt fairly normalized, and thank goodness for that. So another more typical happening. Mai tries to troll and tease Sakuta. Sakuta replies with cheeky insistence that although he partially got what he wanted anyway, it's probably no big deal for her. She flaunts faux indifference, etc. She continues to tease and play hard to get. He plays hopeless. She is genuinely embarrassed, but actually gives in the end of this flirty little tug-of-war. There is present to the actual push and pull of the playful but emotive bargaining that takes place between this couple. That's ultimately also to make the point that I think the show has pretty good conversation. Koga could not live without her phone, which is relevant given how much space social media takes up in our lives, as well as the lives of these characters. Our MC is also literally someone who threw away his phone to take care of the remaining social ills surrounding the tragic situation with him and his sister. So we begin Koga and Sakuta's faux date by finding out that Koga didn't get enough sleep because she was engaged on group chat and YouTube videos. She says, "I'll be in trouble if I can't keep up with the conversation," regarding the newest videos, the current meta, the Zeitgeist. She is anxious about giving her own impressions and feels now late in doing so. Personally, I just keep thinking about this weird, trendy modern idea that events that aren't recorded and commented on didn't happen, or at least don't hold quite the same type of value. Now, if that sounds totally normal to you, well then perhaps it just is by now. I have to assume that much of my audience is inevitably going to be younger than I am, some of you having had these things your entire lives. It's not like I'm exactly in a position to complain about this wholesale. I am trying to become a YouTuber, and I'm also a musician in the process of adapting to modern digital sound design, and what I think is in many ways a beautiful new set of at least mostly free, and more importantly, free of unwelcome influence, platforms. Platforms for sharing all sorts of content, finding somewhere to advertise, somewhere to connect, somewhere to perhaps even receive funding if we don't manage to screw that up, and etc. One honest problem is one that I see even in myself, that we can actually manage to value the record of an experience as much or more than the experience itself. I don't enjoy thinking about how many times I've had a perfectly good meal go cold while I was trying to get the right Instagram picture with decent lighting and the right angle, and now I sometimes promptly just end up microwaving it as if that were just a normal occurrence. Koga, on the other hand, ends up doing things like coming to school with a cold just to keep up with the conversation, boasting herself as someone all too good at measuring the atmosphere, who apparently feels quite compelled to always work it out perfectly. A skill that of course goes hand in hand with her puberty syndrome, which causes her to keep rolling the dice, trying to play her scenario out until she ultimately gets what she wants, leading to the Groundhog's Day loop. Koga's more general problem, her disintegration as I labeled it earlier, manifests itself in the fact that she agonizes over who she was before moving compared to who she is now, the innocent young country bumpkin, and the now well-adjusted and perfectly socially acceptable high school girl among high school girls. She is forced to acknowledge that she worked for who she is and says she even likes who she is now, but is hesitant to own the changes that she has made in herself as genuinely hers. This is, as far as I can tell, just an extension of her neurotically agonizing over her own self-image and social media presence. It's no surprise she would become fairly self-critical if she has this foresight-like ability to read the atmosphere and is always agonizing over whether or not she is representing and is properly representing herself across the sweeping footprint of her social and online presence. This sense of self-criticism ultimately leaked into her real life, and she self-criticized her own genuine characteristics and feelings until she was perfectly capable of simply denying their legitimacy. And then there's good old YouTube reminding Koga of her self-imposed inferiority complex to Mai. The next arc, of course, belongs to Futaba. She is, as stated before, the quirky glasses kudere science girl. She makes coffee and other items chemi-style and cooks in labware with a digital measuring device. Or perhaps Futaba is making hot chocolate. She's pouring hot water into a seemingly empty cup, so it is, of course, something instant, right? Why am I trying to figure this out? I could just check the light novel. Nah. We also get lots of these scenes of Futaba attempting to explain quantum mechanics theories and the like to this determined sack of rocks. But quotes such as, "I followed the recipe exactly, it's just like a science experiment," aside, isn't just a quirky science girl with standard science girl problems. As stated before, she's ironically head over heels for Yuma, a kind but clueless jock for fairly simple but circumstantial reasons. Futaba's phenomenon, her separation, occurred when half of her was desperately seeking attention and the other half was disgusted with the means by which she felt capable of garnering such attention. Futaba felt like a filthy thing for the way the boys looked at her, when she started developing curves earlier than the other girls. This is clearly another example of issues stemming from the theme of self-image as represented throughout the show. I think you can intuit more about the shared themes that run forward throughout the arcs, but these aren't issues that just fall in line with the tropes in mind, and I can appreciate some intentional dissonance in this regard. Although I could turn this into a gargantuan video by speaking at length about both Nautica and Kaede, or talking about Futaba in more depth, I'm just going to go out of my way long enough to say that I personally experienced this weirdly morose perspective on the impending conclusion of Kaede's arc, and the farewell to Kaede. I couldn't help but ponder the thought that this was not only Sakuta witnessing someone who he was trying to help passing slowly away, it was also the event in which he would lose the only person who was centrally dependent on him in his greatly shaken post-tragedy life. The only person who at this point absolutely dependably gave his life an inherent sense of meaning, and that shit had me all sorts of broken up. There are 3 taboo words: annoying, clueless, and lame. In my opinion, a more easily digestible version here is annoying, uncool, and can't take hints. Now, folks like Jeff at Mother's Basement have of course already went in on how much Japanese culture plays into this notion that to be a bother, to awkwardly not take clues, is expressly taboo, so I won't go too deep on that element itself, but I did find interesting how consistently at the forefront this, as well as some other forms of interpersonal drama, were with the continued atmosphere of the show. There is clearly standard school drama throughout. Students have seemingly cemented positions in the school hierarchy. Reputation can lead to avoidance of even secondhand association, such as Yuma's girlfriend's attitude towards Sakuta. There are the briefly mentioned rumors spread among the basketball team, specifically over online group chat, of course. Then there are the troubles with Mai's presence as a public figure of sorts, as well as what is briefly traversed in the Idol Sisters arc. I think I enjoy elements such as this best when they are generally sort of pre-baked into the world that I'm experienced, and not just offshoot occurrences, and that's definitely what we got here. The show has some tropes, no doubt. Presentation is quite nice, but certainly short of perfect. There are definitely some CG background characters, and occasionally cars, as well. But they are sparse, and certainly not as jarringly bad as many shows from recent memory. On the other end of the spectrum, there are absolutely gorgeous sets of frames in each respective waifu's ending, but shots of this quality are certainly not frequent. It jumps from day to day quite early on to avoid fluff, though this does make the school itself seem like a somewhat uneventful place at first. This is later performed expertly when Groundhog Days occur. Sakuta humorously takes advantage of his foresight and cuts corners where he knows he can get away with it, a far more interesting trick for speeding humorously through repeated scenes. The show has many subtle, self-referential moments, which are progressively sentimental as the show goes on. It has slick puns, and in general, not what I would personally boast as good writing as much as good conversation that I appreciate, given the specific tone and its handling of relationships. Though of course it's not on the level of the Monogatari series, which I've seen it compared to, for example. I'm sort of confused, though, on why people come into a show like this that's vaguely similar in some ways, among what has clearly defined itself as another of these weird subgenres, and make as if it not being the newest Monogatari or the newest Haruhi means it's something that only new viewers who haven't seen the classics should rightly enjoy. I guess I'm really only bothered by this because it seems to presume something inevitable about the maturing tastes of others based on your own taste in the general status quo. And that's not only assuming on the part of the person you're talking to what they're looking for in particular, it also just strikes me as a bit boring. I'm likely to argue to my last gasping breath, of course, on why I think one show is crap, and no doubt I'll end up arguing why I think Technolize is objectively the greatest anime of all time, given its expert playing of some of the most traditional storytelling archetypes, flipped completely upside down in such a perfectly subtle fashion. Here I would be clearly arguing, in part in reference to not only why it pushed my particular buttons in the right way, but also why it so perfectly reflects a sort of natural writing norm and the philosophy on which that norm tends to be grounded. But ultimately, it is at the least interesting to find out that someone likes a show for different reasons, or even for stupid reasons. So enjoy the anime you enjoy, and try not to worry too much about the vindication on either side, because it's fun. And because it's fun to argue and shitpost and armchair philosophize about how we all like different things, and think each other's tastes and waifus are trash. Anyways, I'm sort of just spinning my wheels at this point. This show surely isn't going to be for everyone, but I thought the overall quality was praiseworthy. I gave it a 9, and that may transition to an 8 if it loses its luster in further viewing or if it just doesn't hold tight in my memory. I'm personally quite open to the metrics and the distribution of my scores transforming as time passes. I think that's only natural, though who knows in which direction they might change in the future, given how absolutely particular they are at this time. All in all, this season tied itself off by sticking to its guns with its quirky couple, and do I appreciate a satisfying and fitting ending or what? It's absolutely integral. If you appreciated this video, please leave a like, subscribe if you will, comment and let me know what your favorite parts of this video were, which shows you're looking forward to, just whatever it is you'd like to talk about.